In January 1991, Susan Polgar became the first ever woman to receive the prestigious Grandmaster title in chess through the conventional route. Now, her story has been one of remarkable success, going from being a child prodigy all the way to becoming a pioneer in chess for gender equality. Susan also had two sisters, but far from being hidden in her shadow, they also achieved remarkable success as well. Her sister Judith also became a chess grandmaster, and Sophia, her other sister, has become a chess international master. Now, both of these are remarkably prestigious titles, especially for women in the game. Now, it's obviously incredibly impressive for anyone to become a chess grandmaster, but for three sisters to become so dominant in the game is absolutely fascinating. But perhaps the most impressive and fascinating thing about this entire story is the way that these talents were developed. In the first video in this series, I spoke about talent and therefore what makes a talented and great trader. We drew on information from studies and also from world-class performers such as chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov, to help explain the parallels with trading. Now, in this video, which is the second part of this three-part series, I want to talk about how this talent is actually created and how we can become world-class traders. I'm going to be drawing again on information from studies, and all of the information I talk about can be found in a list of books in the description box if you want to do further reading. And it is, of course, also based on my own experience as a trader and from developing other traders around the world. It's quite common for us to be in awe of talent and to assume that we could never ever reach the lofty heights of some of the best performers around the world. But the question is, why not? Joe DiMaggio is one of the greatest and most successful baseball players of all time. Now, I recently read a quick story about him, about a time that he was being interviewed by a reporter who went on to ask him how it felt to be such a natural hitter. Rather than giving him a direct answer, he took the reporter and led him down into his dark basement. Nothing dodgy is going to happen. And what he did, he picked up his bat and he started doing some practice swings. But just before each swing, he'd call out a certain type of pitch, and his swing would be in anticipation for whatever type of throw is coming at him. After a while of doing these practice swings, he walked straight over to the wall and marked down a tally. After that, he switched the lights on, and the reporter saw that the wall was covered in these tallies, absolutely covered. And Joe DiMaggio walks over to the reporter and says, "Don't you ever call me a natural hitter again." Now, whether or not that's a genuine story or just an urban myth, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the sentiment, because the sentiment in that story is absolutely true. You see, there have been many studies that have come out which have proven that there's a certain way that talent is grown. So, let's go back to the story of the Polgar sisters, the chess sisters that we discussed at the beginning of this video. Now, behind the success of the Polgar sisters was their father, Laszlo Polgar. In a similar way to the story of the Williams sisters in tennis, this was all about a parent who was intent on coaching their children to world-class success before they were even born. However, in the unique case of the Polgar sisters, their father Laszlo was an educational psychologist, and he was a big advocate for the belief that talent and genius is developed through nurture rather than nature. In other words, you can create and build talent rather than needing to be born with it. In order to prove his theory, Polgar decided to embark on the ultimate experiment. Before his first child was even born, he vowed to train them to become a chess grandmaster. And he chose chess because success is objective and there's a scoring system that determines how good you really are. Susan Polgar was homeschooled by her father with a big focus on chess. She started learning the game when she was 4, and by the time she was 5, she was actually able to beat her father. Susan's future successes, along with those of her sisters, proved Laszlo's theories to be correct. A genius is not born, it is developed through training and education. Any child born healthy is a potential genius. But I'm guessing if you're watching this, then you're not a child. So you're probably sitting there thinking, well, what's child genius got to do with my trading? Yes, we all know that if a child practices hard at something, they'll become great at it. But so what? Well, because it's not as straightforward as that. It's not as straightforward as just practicing something over and over again when you're a child. There's actually an optimal way of learning something and becoming an elite level performer in whatever it is you're trying to learn. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be breaking down the development of talent into 3 certain things that we need to do in a particular way. And these are ignition, deliberate practice, and coaching. So we're going to go through those 3 points. So let's kick things off by talking about deliberate practice. This is also known as deep practice, and the reason we're going to start off with it is because there's certain aspects of deliberate practice that are going to help you to understand the importance of the other 2 things that I spoke about. So really quickly, right at the start, I want to talk to you about the science behind building a skill or building a talent. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I'm sure you're not here watching this video to learn anything about science or biology. So we'll go over it as sort of like high level, just sort of running through it, the basics, just so that you understand what's behind all this process, so you understand the things I'm telling you about are not just airy-fairy things that I'm pulling out of thin air to tell you to do this or do that, but it actually has a grounding in science, and it's going to help you to optimize the way that you're learning and becoming really good at trading. And of course, there are so many more ways we can benefit from this information if we don't go through it as a high-level overview. So if you do want to take the time to learn about this in great detail, which I recommend because I've done it as well, then check out the books I put in the description box, as I mentioned at the beginning. Read through them and you'll start to really get a good grasp of really how you can benefit from this knowledge. Imagine when you're performing an action or making a decision, electrical energy is passing through your brain from one neuron to another. It's sort of like an internet connection. The movements of these electrons is essentially how you perform these thoughts and actions. And these electrons are moving along something called an axon. However, these axons that go from one neuron to another are not all equal. There's a fatty substance called myelin that's wrapped around these axons, and the more myelin there is around the axon, the faster the electron can travel. So basically, some axons are like broadband connection and others are like dial-up internet connection. So can you imagine the big difference in speed and quality of actions and thoughts that are traveling depending on the certain amount of myelin that's on these axons? So our aim when we're trying to learn a skill is to build the amount of myelin for those specific actions or thoughts, to try and improve the connection between the neurons and to try and get that skill hardwired into our brain. This is what child prodigies do, this is what world-class performers do, and this is what great traders do, whether they all know they're doing it or not. Now, luckily for us, there is an effective way to build up this level of myelin, and that is through something called deliberate practice. This involves many repetitions, making mistakes, fixing the mistakes, and generally pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone so that we can start to generate this myelin growth. So since myelin is a living tissue, we need to build it up sort of like the same way we build muscle. So if you think down at the gym, if you're trying to work a specific muscle, if every time you go at the gym you're doing repetitions with the same weight, you're not really going to improve, are you? I mean, sure, you're doing something and it always feels great when you're doing something you can do easily, but you're not going to grow that way. Instead, when we're working out a muscle at the gym, we have to use something called progressive overload. And this is quite similar to what we have to do with our myelin as well, or with our axons to build up that myelin. So I always think that deliberate practice is probably best explained by imagining someone that's been driving a car for 30 years. So in that very first year when they're learning the skill, they're learning how to drive, then they're focusing on form, they're understanding the correct way of doing things, they're correcting their mistakes, fixing their mistakes, they're pushing themselves beyond their comfort zone, going on busier roads, going through different gears, really visualizing what they should be doing, understanding a hazard, all of that kind of thing. And if you look at the progress from where they very first start at the beginning of that year to the end of that first year, and maybe when they pass their driving test, then it's almost unrecognizable. They've made so much progress. However, once they've passed their test, they'll then revert from deliberate practice to ordinary practice. Because remember I said if it's someone that's been driving their car for 30 years, if they had that much time with really deliberate, deep practice, you'd expect that they're driving around like Lewis Hamilton. but instead it's just ordinary practice. Yes, they might be clocking up hours on the road driving, but they're going over the same things time and time again. They're not pushing themselves outside their comfort zone. The whole point is that they're driving within their comfort zone on the roads that they've learnt on. They're doing the same things over and over again and not developing. Now, can you think how this relates to your trading? Do you ever go over the same things again and again and again, the same markets, the same times? I mean, if I sit there and have a load of chart time, let's say 8 hours of chart time, that's going to be similar to driving around for 8 hours if it's not deliberate practice. So if I sit there at the chart for 8 hours a day, is that really doing any good for my trading? Well, not really, because you see there's a big difference between ordinary practice and deliberate practice. So there's a difference between just sitting there observing the charts and really engaging in trying to build your craft while doing it. And it's actually been found for like people developing to world-class talent actually only spend probably about 2 to 3 hours a day in deliberate practice, because it's really difficult to focus and maintain that level of deliberate practice and, you know, real intent in what you're doing for longer than that. I mean, some people, when they're right at the beginning, they're just learning, they do have up to 5 hours, but a lot of that time otherwise is going to be wasted. You're going to revert back into ordinary practice, and then it's just not going to be practical, efficient time for you. Unless you're trading and looking for opportunities, that's a different story. But if you want to develop and become better, you need to optimize to be in deliberate practice mode. Now, to really make the most of deliberate practice, you're going to need more than what I can summarize for you in like these 2 or 3 points that we're going to go through. But I am going to summarize sort of the high level stuff, so you've got something you can already get working on. So basically what we want to do is to chunk the skill into different components that we can focus on as chunks. We also then want to break it down into individual actions that we can then focus on and make sure that we get the technique right with those. We want to always be reflecting and fixing what we've done, visualizing the best way of what it is we're trying to achieve, and also constantly pushing ourselves to the very edge of our ability, slightly outside of our comfort zone, so that we start to adapt and grow. For example, in our mini series where we teach the foundations of our method, which you get for free for joining our inner circle, the link's in the description box, then we always start off the trading by going through what we call the wild horse approach. So this allows you to sort of go through an overview of the entire skill all at once before you're even close to being ready for it. So at least you are starting right from the beginning to experience the entire skill. It's sort of like when you're going through a tennis serve, to actually see the whole tennis serve being done and attempt it all at once before you then start to break it down. And this is then what we're able to do in our full course. So we break it down into sections, different chunks, different areas of the skill. So you can understand one whole chunk and focus on that to understand what it is that's going on in that particular action. Whether this is money management, horizontal significant levels, or anything else, you understand the whole of that chunk of the skill. And then we can break it down even further into individual actions, individual thoughts, decisions, tools, so that we can understand from the chunk when something's not going right with that chunk. You can look at the individual components and see which one you need to work on and really focus in on that. And you can then incorporate this into your practice sessions. So for example, if it's looking for the very correct way to construct your Fibonacci range and spending an entire session just looking at that aspect and really even focusing even more, is it identifying the C point? Is that the difficulty you're having? Spend a whole session looking at that. And you can take it really slow and really focus in on it. And with all of these things, you want to be incorporating them into your practice session in a fast and a slow way. So in a fast way so that you're pushing yourself, and it's something we're going to talk about in just a second, but in a slow way so you really break it down and understand, give yourself more time to really construct it properly, or whatever it is you're trying to do. Like with the tennis serve, if you're throwing the ball up, of course you could do it quickly to learn it quickly, but you want to go slowly, make sure the technique's right, because when things are slow, you can make sure they're perfect. So of course you can do this by using the time frames to your advantage. If you're trading on a 15-minute chart, you can go really slow by going up to an hour chart, because then you've got much more time to make your decisions, to make your constructions and whatever else. Or if you wanted to go really quick, you can drop down to 5 minutes. Since we know the charts are scale invariant, it means that the same things we're applying to any time frame should run across all the time frames. So even if you're going to be trading a daily chart, you can actually use the 5-minute chart. And we'll come on to that in a second. It's so important with all of these things that you're really visualizing, taking that time before you even start to visualize the correct way of doing it. It's like, imagine that you're playing guitar and you're learning a song, then you can play the song, you can listen to it, and then you need to really visualize from the music that you've heard how you're going to perform it. Like before you play the notes, how should those be sounding? It's the same with trading. If you're drawing out trend lines, how should that be looking? What is the baseline trend line meant to be looking at? You need to visualize, maybe spend some time looking at it done in perfect form, and then dissect it, look at the different aspects of that, and then apply it in your own trading. And that's an important thing here as well, by the way, is that if you're looking at a perfect example, you need to be recording your own practice as well. Not just your actual trading, but your practice time as well, because that's the only way you're going to be able to reflect on what you've done, compare it and have a look at what should have been done, and improve on your mistakes. If you're not tracking everything you do from practicing to trading and whatever else, you're missing out on prime opportunities for building more and more myelin. And so like I referred to a minute ago, we need to be doing things quickly as well. So going down in time frames, we know they're scale invariant, use a 5-minute chart, and this way you're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone in a more pressurized situation. Things are moving fast, you've got to think fast, and that's going to push you to learn because you're growing. But at the same time, by doing things on a faster time scale, you're also including more repetitions. And it's those repetitions of deliberate practice that's going to help you to build that myelin and become better and better at the things you're practicing at, as long as you're learning with the correct form. And you know how it is. With any skill, when someone gets to a level where they're competent or they're quite good, they kind of stop wanting to do this deliberate practice, because when you're good at something, it's quite nice just to keep going over that. But you need to be practicing, you need to be pushing yourself to make sure that you're constantly developing. It's just like Vladimir Horowitz said, who's a famous classical pianist. He said that if I don't practice one day, I notice. If I don't practice 2 days, my wife notices. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the world notices. I mean, what's really fascinating is that we can look at world-class performers from other things, other disciplines. So take a look, for example, at Steph Curry, who's a superstar NBA player. In his practice sessions or his warm-up sessions before a game, where most people are limbering up and just going through the shots and making sure that they're all warm, he's actually challenging himself. He's pushing himself to do things that are much more difficult than what he'd actually do in the game itself. Because this is going to not only help him to be better in the game, but also be constantly improving. I mean, you can see it in the clip here, and I'm going to leave the link to the video in the description box. I suggest you watch it because it's really inspirational. See how you constantly can push yourself to constantly be getting better. And we can do that as traders. We just need to find the time to put in this deliberate practice time. An important thing to note is that it's been widely found that about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is necessary to become exceptionally talented, like world class at something. Now, that sounds like a lot of time, and it is. If we think that you can only have an optimal deliberate practice time of, let's say, 2 or 3 hours a day, it's the equivalent of doing that every day for 10 years. Now, that's not a reason to get disheartened. In fact, I would take that as an inspirational thing, because it means that anyone can do it if you're willing to put in the work. But don't let it dishearten you, because that's to get a world-class talent level. You can still become a profitable and good trader along the way from less hours than that, but you need to keep working at reaching that 10,000 hour point and beyond that. It's really got to make you think that if it takes 10,000 hours to become exceptionally talented, then of course if you do less than that you're not going to be talented. But what about if you don't put in any hours of deliberate practice? Does that maybe explain why certain people reach a certain point of their trading and they keep doing the same things, they don't progress and they don't get better? It's because they're not putting in this deliberate practice. They're just wasting hours of their life with screen time that's doing nothing for them. And that's not even all. I mean, once we hit 30, our myelin production slows down, and by the age of 50 it can actually start reversing a bit, and you start breaking down these connections that you had. The myelin starts deteriorating. So while you're young, or while you're able to, you should really be putting in these hours before it's too late. Okay, so let's quickly cover off the other 2 aspects that I mentioned. Remember, one of them was coaching. And this is something that a lot of people tend to neglect, especially with trading, but it's super important for building this myelin and becoming talented at anything. Now, coaching is really important because it gives you the proper and correct technique for the things that you're trying to learn. It also gives you the right perspective where someone can give you feedback that you wouldn't otherwise pick up on, so that you can fix those mistakes and keep growing. Because without that coaching, without that external perspective and someone critiquing what you're doing, you're never really really going to know if you're hitting the right technique or if you're falling into these silly mistakes that are going to keep you in a cycle and stop you from progressing. So firstly, of course, you need to know the right technique in the first place. It's like when I was playing basketball, I could shoot quite well, but my coach was picking up on a certain thing I was doing and I wasn't shooting with the correct form. So what she did was, over the summer, she said, okay, you're not allowed to use your left hand anymore, and you have to stand under the basket and with one arm, extend your arm and flick your wrist until you do it consistently. So every practice session I have to go through that and that, step back, do it again, do it again, do it again, until finally I was consistent and the form was right with this hand. She then said, okay, you can include your left hand now and do it from further back. And suddenly my shooting form was perfect and I was shooting at a much better rate. So this is the same thing with trading. You need to know the right technique, but you need a coach that's got that understanding, that external perspective and the understanding of the different chunks and the different specific aspects of the chunks to really look at your trading and to be able to identify what particular area is going wrong and the exact feedback or the exact drills or practice, whatever you need to do to improve that. So this is like what we're trying to achieve with our course members on the forum. So throughout the course, we're breaking down what we think is the right technique and teaching them that based on our method. And then in the forum, we can look at what they're doing, their trading, we can give feedback, tell them certain areas they need to work on, and make sure that they're getting that external perspective to make sure that they're learning things the right way, not falling into bad habits, and progressing with their deliberate practice. And in fact, if you are a course member watching this, I don't ask for much very often, but maybe you can leave a sentence or two in the comment section below and explain your experience of using the forum and getting feedback and some form of coaching with your trading to help you progress. And maybe also, if anyone's got any questions, you could help by answering their questions about your experience. So you see, this coaching thing is a very important topic and important enough that I think we'll cover it in more detail in other videos as well. But let's come on to the third and final point that I mentioned, which is ignition. So ignition is basically the inspiration to learn the skill. But it's more than just inspiration, because inspiration can sometimes be something that's quite short-lived, like I'm suddenly inspired to go and sit down and work for 5 hours. This inspiration, this ignition, needs to be something that ignites the flame in you, that develops that love for the skill and makes you want to, for a long period of time, like over the long term, develop and work on building this skill because it's ignited that fire in you, that passion for what you're doing. So ignition means falling in love for trading as it is. You're not falling in love with the money or falling in love with the perception people will have of you as a trader, but actually for the skill itself. Which is why on this channel you don't hear me that often talking about how much money you can make, maybe a few times, but it's more about trying to get across my passion for trading, to try and ignite that flame in you. Which is why I don't like it when you can see all these two-bob on Instagram and stuff like that, trying to show off their flashy cars and whatever else, because that's not going to give you the inspiration to have this long-standing, like long-lasting, burning flame inside you to really put in the deliberate practice hours and start building this myelin inside you. And besides that, it's very clear that those people on Instagram have not put in their 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, so they should just zip it. Anyway, in the next video in this series, which is the third and final video, we'll be talking about the true mindset you need to start building this talent and becoming a great trader. And within that, we will also touch upon ignition again in a bit more detail. But for now, we're going to call that a day in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know there's a lot to take in, and believe me, it took me a very long time putting this together for you. But if you liked the video, if you found it useful, then please do hit that thumbs up. I appreciate it after all the work I put into this one. And if you did enjoy the video, leave a comment below letting me know that you enjoyed it and which part in particular you found most interesting. We will touch upon these topics again in future videos, so I'd like to know which areas people want to focus on more. But for now, I just wanted to set out these foundations. I've been very excited about this video series. I'm glad that we're getting it out there for you. Make sure you subscribe for more videos about trading and to make sure you don't miss out on the third and final part of this series. I really appreciate you watching as always. Take care. I'll see you in the next video very soon. Bye bye.